Good evening, everyone. My name is Elliot Rana, and on behalf of Harvard Bookstore, I am so excited to welcome you to our event with Alice Wong, presenting her new book, Disability Intimacy, Essays on Love, Care, and Desire, in conversation tonight with LEAH Lakshmi Piepzna-Samaransiha and Nicole Lee Schroeder. I'd also like to note that Ellen Samuels initially planned to join this conversation, but is unable to attend tonight due to unforeseen circumstances. We're so pleased to have you joining tonight's discussion. I'll be sending a link to Disability Intimacy in the chat during the presentation for you to check out and purchase from our website. We're also fortunate to have a live captioner and ASL interpreters with us for tonight's event, so make sure your captioning is turned on, and please send me a message if you have any trouble with either of those options. And now, I am so pleased to introduce Alice Wong. Alice is a disabled activist, media maker, and research consultant based in San Francisco, California. She's the author of a best-selling memoir, Year of the Tiger, founder and director of the Disability Visibility Project, an online community dedicated to creating, sharing, and amplifying disability media and culture, and the editor of the anthologies Disability Visibility, First-Person Stories from the 21st Century, and Disability Visibility, 17 First-Person Stories for Today. Alice is also the host and co-producer of the Disability Visibility podcast and co-partner in a number of collaborations, such as #CryptTheVote and Access is Love. From 2013 to 2015, Alice served as a member on the National Council of Disability, an appointment by then President Barack Obama. We're so pleased to host this event to celebrate Disability Intimacy, Alice's newest book. So now, I'll turn it over to Alice Wong.
Hello everyone, it's a delight to be here with you all online and want to thank Harvard Bookstore for hosting this event and the ASL interpreters and captioners. I'd like to thank Elliot for their introduction and everyone at Harvard Bookstore who made this event possible. My book has been out for a little over a month already, and this is such a wonderful opportunity to celebrate it with you all today. I haven't moderated a conversation since I became a non-speaking person about 2 years ago, so please put up with my nervousness. I use a speech-to-text app to speak right now, and there are times when it may mispronounce words. It may also take me a minute or two to type a response as well. I'm wearing a denim shirt and a bright red lip color. There is a tracheostomy at my throat with a tube connected to a ventilator. While we are gathered here online, there is an active genocide happening in Palestine by the Israeli Defense Forces. Massive starvation and disablement is happening to Palestinians. We are in solidarity with the people of Palestine, who are fighting for their homeland. Today I'm honored to be in conversation with 3 of the contributors to Disability Intimacy, Nicole Schroeder and LEAH Lakshmi Piepzna-Samarathinha. Unfortunately, Ellen Samuels is not feeling well and is unable to join us today, but she is here with us in spirit. I'd like each of you to introduce yourselves, starting with Nicole and LEAH.
Hello, I'm Nicole. I'm a white woman in my 30s. I have brown hair cut in a wavy bob with bangs. I wear rose gold glasses, and today I have a pink blouse on.
Hi, I'm LEAH. I'm a youngish looking 40-ish non-binary femme of mixed Sri Lankan and white ancestry with light brown skin, brown and teal curly hair, and I'm wearing a really bold lip color because I love Alice.
This is Alice. Thank you all for your introductions, and as you can tell, we are a stellar group of disabled people gathered here, and I mean that in the most modest sense, haha. When I first envisioned my latest anthology a few years ago, I wanted it to push, expand, and subvert the meaning of intimacy from disabled perspectives. Most books and other forms of media often only cover intimacy as romantic love and sex. I think it's so much more, and while I am personally working on my understanding of intimacy, I'd like to ask all 3 of you what intimacy means to you. Why don't we start with Nicole and then Leah?
This is Nicole. So I think for me, intimacy is really just about honesty. And so establishing intimacy is a kind of ritual of trust and vulnerability, where you're accepting someone else's honesty and hopefully trying to be honest yourself. My health is really variable, and it is really hard for me to convey the highs and the lows, especially to people who have met me during some of my most stable health moments. And so as I experienced more lows in my teens and 20s, intimacy became a new litmus test for my relationships. And so when I was vulnerable, or when people saw and witnessed how unwell I was, it kind of served as a test for our relationship. And unfortunately, I learned really quickly that I was not in community with a lot of people that I thought I was in community with. And people were really uncomfortable with the degree of vulnerability and honesty and grittiness with which I kind of had to talk about my health, and I experienced a lack of health. And so that sounds super negative, but I think the reverse is also true, right? The litmus test can prove who is not in community with you, but it can also prove who is there in community with you. And so I think establishing intimacy was a kind of lesson in how to practice love and how to experience love in a healthy way. I think some of my first loving relationships were with disabled people who invited intimacy into our relationship and taught me how to practice that. And so I'm really, really thankful to the elders who kind of invited me into their healthcare journeys, who taught me how to advocate for myself, and who were just explicitly vulnerable with me at some of their lowest points. And so I think the willingness of disabled people to kind of share their fears and their limitations and a lot of really messy, complicated feelings about living in an ableist world was really pivotal to me developing a disability consciousness and kind of embracing that in my teens and 20s.
So what I have down is disabled intimacy for me means so many things. And first of all, it means intimacy with the self. So as an autistic person, I feel like I was pushed to not be intimate with myself because I was taught from a very young age that my sensations, my desires, my needs were wrong, quote unquote, crazy and invalid. And I needed to mask and create this performance of a fake neurotypical self instead in order to survive. And it's been very powerful and tender for me as a late realized autistic person in my 40s to, in my 40s, be finally getting the chance to be intimate with what my actual neurodivergent needs and desires are. And this has opened up a lot of room for me to crip and ND my relationships as a verb. So what this means is that some of my intimacies are that I'm intimate with land. I'm intimate with the dead. I'm intimate with lovers who are long distance and for whom our sex, desire, and closeness does not exist on the neurotypical relationship or intimacy elevator. Some of my closest relationships are with certain long distance Black, brown, immigrant, autistic friends, where our entire relationship is in very long voice memo for voice memo exchanges. You know who you are. Second, I think a lot about disabled intimacies that are really visceral. And Nicole spoke about this a little bit too. Some of my most comforting and precious disabled intimacies are with other Crips about shit, piss, blood, vomit, and biopsies, plus fatigue and really neurodiversity spicy moments. I love how real we get. I'm really comforted and kept safe by being seen and understood by each other. It's so the opposite of being abandoned or shunned for being too much, which was a common experience in my early life and still happens. And specifically around being too much around like the bloodshed and gore of disability. Yeah, that's what I've got.
This is Alice. Would two like to respond to one another's responses to what intimacy means? Feel free to jump in. This is your time, Nicole and Leah.
This is Nicole. So yeah, I love this idea of the intimacy with the self. I think my experience was different, but I have Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, which causes a lot of chronic pain and a whole slew of other issues. But for a long time, I was just told like, tough it up, or this is just growing pains, or like, you're not actually experiencing the pain that you think you are. And so I had many, many years of kind of just disassociating. And I'm only now trying to teach myself how to listen to my body and trust what my body is telling me. And that is really hard when you've spent years and years and years telling yourself like, no, you're not actually feeling this, or you must be exaggerating this, or right, like the constant stream of gaslighting from medical professionals and other professionals in your life makes this really tenuous moment, because diagnosis in some ways frees you to claim that thing and allows you to understand it more fully or seek more people who already have walked that path. And that can be so freeing, which is why I think self-diagnosis is so critical, especially to communities who don't have access to meaningful diagnostic care. And yeah, I think that is a process that hopefully doesn't stop. I hope it's a continual process of kind of self-growth where I become more intimate with myself over time.
This is Leah. I love that. I kind of hate the word iterative. It's gotten really popular lately, but I'm going to say it's like that process where the process is a process. Like it doesn't stop how we learn how to be intimate with ourselves and others. Nicole, one thing that I loved about what you shared was just the practice. I always want to bring our beloved Stacey Park Milburn into the room, and the term that she invented of crip doulaing, where as disabled people, we mentor each other. And I think sometimes people think of it as like, oh, it's the older crip that teaches the younger crip, or the one who's more seasoned. And that's true sometimes, but I also think it's not true all of the time, that there's so much peer mentorship and we trade places so much of the time. There's a phrase that Miriam Kaba, Mariamekaba, says a lot, where she says anything worth doing is worth doing with other people. And I both agree, and I get really frustrated with that phrase sometimes because of how so many of us have been forced into isolation, right? So I think it's both and. I think it's been very important for me as an autistic person who has deep needs and pleasures around solitude, around downtime, around non-human interactions, to really claim that my ways of being intimate in solitude are not fake or less or wrong. And also the ways in which I've been able to be intimate with other disabled and autistic people has been life-saving, the way you speak to Nicole. And it's not just like, oh, I'm this seasoned cripple, I have it all figured out, I'm good now. I need it all the time. I mean, right now, I got COVID 2 weeks ago. I'm being held so hard by so many people in my life who are long haulers, who are talking with me when I'm like, I'm really scared and depressed that my ME is going to come back, who are bringing me drugs off label, that they have extra of, who are bringing me groceries, who are telling me, hey, cancel your gig, you're sick. Please don't try and be a super crip this month. Like, please rest, right? The whole experience that I'm having of what is a global disabling event that's landed on me, is really held by that. And I'm going to pause for a second because I'm getting delivery food, which is a disabled intimacy, and I'm going to let them know to just leave it downstairs. Oh, damn. Oh.
This is Nicole. I will respond to that comment if we have the time for it, but Alice, you just let me know if we don't. So I'm just gonna carry that thought that like it truly takes a whole community. I think there are so many things that I maybe like expected from my medical process of getting a diagnosis. I thought it would open up all of these magical doors and treatments and like there would be a clear path forward and an understanding of palliative care. And then when I was in the medical system, I realized like, no, there's zero plan. The point of that doctor's office or that hospital is to make sure you don't immediately die, but they're not really particularly interested in like you living a good life outside of their spaces, right? If you're not an immediate problem, if you're not an acute issue, then you're not at the height of their, order of operations. And I think it took me really leaning really heavily on disabled community members to envision what a fulfilling life might look like, and to just get information about like what can I hope to have or achieve or secure for my own care that doctors are not going to talk to me about or help me find or really care about in the moments. And so I can easily say that absolutely other disabled people have kept me alive in so many ways, as Leah said, from literally like mailing me EpiPens or other drugs that I needed to save my life, all the way to like the very everyday.
That
Yeah.
was so weird. I thought I was disconnected, but I wasn't. I don't know. Here we are.
This is Alice. I totally feel what you just said, Nicole. I had to reschedule this event because I wasn't feeling well and I felt very overwhelmed by book promotion with so many events in May. Thank you, Leah and Nicole. I appreciate what you two shared. Okay, now we're getting to the fun, meaty part. I would love for each of you to read a short excerpt to give the audience a taste of your brilliance. And after reading it, can you share why you selected it and anything else you would like to say about your piece? Let's start with Leah and Nicole. And Ellen gave us permission to read her poem and Nicole will be reading it.
Amazing. So I'm going to start with a quote. My ancestors are disabled people who lived looking out of institution windows, wanting so much more for themselves. My ancestors are queers who live in the American South. It's because of them I understand the importance of living life big, even if it's dangerous. All of my ancestors know longing. Longing is often our connecting place. Stacey Park Milburn. And Alice, you originally told me we had 3 to 6 minutes and I put down 12. So I'm only gonna read the second part of the piece that's in the Access document. And it's called My Mother's Window. I am second generation disabled. The disabled autistic child of a disabled, neurodivergent, probably autistic mother who spent her life longing. Like all children, I move in her legacy. I make decisions in this life about how I will repeat what she did or break the chain and invent something different. My mother looked out a lot of windows. My mom was a polio survivor, a working class Irish and Ukrainian Galician Roma girl, a survivor of physical and sexual abuse from her parents and the men of the local Catholic Church. Stories she whispered in fragments to me at the turn at the top of our stairs. She could walk with pain, and she was likely taught, as many polio survivors of her era were, that she could regrow her nerves if she just worked hard enough. Look at FDR, he did it. And that if she could pass as able-bodied, she should thank her lucky stars and never mention she was anything else. She didn't use the D word to describe herself, because that would have killed the narrow slice of freedom and possibility she had access to. But she was disabled and neurodivergent, never calling herself any label, teaching me to lie to doctors at the "have you felt down lately" part of the annual visit starting at age 5, but clearly living with panic, depression, disassociation, and different facets of her personality that didn't remember each other. Clearly also trusting no one, except sometimes me. My mother always thought she was ugly. I remember her looking at her face in the mirror and sighing. Her face falling as I held up a dress from the Worcester Filings basement sales rack and telling me it was too young for her when she must have been 44 at the oldest. Having a cedar chest were her pretty, fun treasures. The Belgian lace and deerskin mini skirt she purchased and rocked the year she lived in London in 1969 lived folded away unworn. Relics of an earlier brief moment when she didn't hate her body. The stories she told me about her childhood were all about being smart, different, and ugly. Being asked to dance once in high school only to have the boy who asked her and all his friends laugh and laugh at the idea that she ever could have thought it was real. She was the only girl in her high school to not get married and pregnant at 16 or immediately after graduation. Something that was never ascribed to being disabled by her, but about being too smart, odd, ugly, all code words for disability. To be smart and neurodivergent and a survivor of more abuse than she could name and post-polio was to be ugly. To be ugly was for your body to be the butt of every joke. But maybe it was also to escape violence and early marriage, get to college. Sometimes ugly, crippled, too smart working class girls are allowed that. The trade-off is being desired. In her world, in this world still, there are dumb, pretty girls and smart, ugly girls, and we were number 2. All the stories my mom shared of joy, of desire and sensuality, of loving the fuck out of her life were about being alone. She was that impossible thing, an unmarried, working-class girl woman in her 20s and 30s, in the 50s and 60s, renting her own apartment, working as a public school teacher, not living with her family, smoking galwazes out of her single girl's apartment window late at night, satiated and alone. Saving up her money to go on solo vacations to Ireland and Paris for a week each summer. No one taught her this. She looked it up in the library, and the library of her dreams, her working class disabled femme ingenuity. She picked the lock of her life with it. All the stories my mother shared about dating, sex, and love were about unfulfilled desire. Having a silent crush for years on a young man, beautiful, leftist, smart, and then realizing that he was gay and uninterested. Then marrying my father, who turned into her necessary compromise. He was smart and weird too, but angry and bratty, bad with money, spending hers, unemployed on the couch, shouting at her and her child and making them cry. And gay or bisexual and not touching her. They had separate beds from the time I can remember. But if she left, it would be proof her disabled body, too ugly. So many stories of pining, never ones of getting satisfied, filled up, fed. I inherited the story of her disabled longing, the feeling of holding yearning in your body. And sometimes it's better that way because it's safe. No one will see your crippled weirdness. You get to control your desire, your fantasies, the orgasms you have at night when everyone has finally left you alone. For disabled femmes, this is riches. Sometimes staring out the window, longing for so much more, can still be a place of freedom. Because the longing for so much more means not accepting the little they've given you. Means using your brain to hack out an imaginary safe space where you can be touched and loved and still have all your weirdness and delicious solitude. Thank you. Did you want me to say briefly why I picked it? Yeah. It's really special to me to be reading in Massachusetts because I'm from Worcester, and my story and my mother's story is such a Worcester working class disabled story. And my mom passed away a year and a half ago, and there's been so much complexity and pain and healing in our relationship. And I went back to Massachusetts for the first time in years, for the last year that she was alive. And there was so much about being there and just being on the land that really grew us and hurt us, and where we still found freedom, that really made me connect with the lineage of disabled longing and violence and healing between her and me. And I really wanted to write what I know of her story, and also how I'm trying to transform our lineage as I keep going in my life.
Okay, I will go next. This is Nicole. Today I am kind of bookending my piece. And so if you have a copy of the book, which is absolutely stunning, I'm reading from the start and the end of my chapter. And so I am going to be reading the portions that I wrote as a love letter to disabled community, and less of the portions that are about myself, because I'm nervous. This is my first time reading any of my creative work ever, or writing creatively. So it's easier to talk to all of you rather than talking about myself. I will selfishly say that. This piece is called Unspooling. Disabled love is a different kind of love. It's neither born from blood ties nor proximity. It doesn't hold to the same rules as romantic, platonic, or familial love. It comes from a shared desire for a better world. It sustains us in moments when we don't love ourselves, and it offers a tether to cling to as we cycle through grief and readjustment. It's not performative or draining. These days, I weave disabled love into my life like a practiced artisan. I spin threads of love from late-night phone calls, Zoom get-togethers, and disparate Twitter threads. Hand over hand, I wind up scraps of wisdom from those who have come before me. I weave line after line, watching as patterns spring into existence, crafted from the instructions they have patiently and lovingly written down. I tamp down row after row, interlacing the love I have for me, the love I have for you, the love I have for us. The craft itself and the result is a thing of beauty. Disabled people spin threads out of nothingness. We hand the shuttle back and forth when we spend time together, build space for one another, and find value in one another's experiences. We map out new patterns and make sure that every thread finds its own space to shine when we build and sustain access for one another. We dig through our reserves and share the threads we've spooled. When doctors take our tools away, we show up with polished shuttle and shed sticks. When newly disabled people say that they have nothing to weave, we show them our finished works and remind them that there is more to this life than darkness. We reach out to those new to the community, those with shakily spun threads. Hand over hand, we twist our own materials to shore up weaker threads until each and every one of us can spin our own unbreakable strands. We spin skein after skein with care, curiosity, and understanding. Together, we weave rows of hope and laughter and joy to balance out those of frustration and despair. We borrow with care, and we share with generosity. We spin and weave and tamp down row after row of love when we build community together. Disabled people know how to love like no others. We show our adoration for one another when we crack morbid jokes. We make one another laugh over very real, terrifying shit. We pay homage to one another by simply witnessing the highs and the lows, cycles of grief and mourning and celebration. We find reverence in the stories shared with us, stories that teach us how to navigate, how to fight, how to resist. We say, I love you in a million ways. When we murmur it at the end of phone calls, hoping that the simple sentiment resonates. When we scribble it all over medical notes, as we help one another compile records, track changes, and figure out how to secure what we need despite a failing medical system. We proclaim it loudly when we protest and make our stories public. Disabled community teaches us how to weave love in a way that's hard to put into words. We weave to sustain ourselves, one another, and our shared histories. We send one another threads across time and space. We ship them off in envelopes with letters and postcards. We trade them during Zoom calls where we do absolutely nothing together. We gift them over long phone calls peppered with silence because quietude is love too. We unabashedly take them when we tell guests to leave already because it's already nap time. And we leave them behind in heaps when we perform care work. The threads whisper that we are worth everything. Thank you. And now I'm going to read Ellen's piece, if we're good for that. Okay. I apologize. This is Ellen Samuel's beautiful poem. It is on page 114 for anyone with the book. It is called Elegy for a Mask Mandate. I'm going to do my best, but I am no poet, so please excuse me. For a year, maybe two, I knew that you loved me. I saw it in your eyes, the windows to the soul, the only part of your face I needed to see to believe. For a season, maybe two, you went with me everywhere, holding hope like a parasol over our heads. I thought we'd created a new world where the sick and the well could be citizens of the same country. I held your disinfected hand at the theater, in the grocery store, places I hadn't gone for years. I knew there would always be the resistors, the ones who since childhood called me queer, cripple, lazy, hysterical. But you muffled them with your hand-sewn cotton, your filter inserts, your N95s. We learned to speak a new vocabulary, to understand what it meant to protect each other so we all survive. In my home now, in my lonely bed, I'm still speaking those words to the silent house. My mask protects you. Your mask protects me. Thank you.
This is Alice. Thank you both for reading an excerpt from your piece on disability intimacy and Ellen's poem. I'd like to ask each of you some questions about your piece. My first question is to both Nicole and Lee regarding Ellen's poem. I first read Ellen's poem when it came out in the Massachusetts Review and immediately knew I had to reprint it in Disability Intimacy. Masking is no longer mandatory in healthcare settings, and it has become politicized when it shouldn't be. We are still in a pandemic no matter what our elected leaders say, and there are now bills in North Carolina and Ohio making mask wearing illegal. Eugenics is alive, and our society is hostile to high-risk people, making our world smaller and smaller, especially in public spaces. As a high-risk person who depends on others to mask to protect me, I'm so curious how you two are faring in your community as people who mask? In what ways is masking a form of community care and love? And is it something more to you personally? Why don't you go first, Leah, and then Nicole?
Thank you, Alice. I know how lucky I am to live in the city where I live right now, in a friend circle where all of my friends practice masking. And obviously there's some times where there's harm reduction. I have a close friend with a 5-year-old who doesn't always mask at school, but we're really honest about it and we take care of each other. And something I think a lot about is how in mainstream society and even in some social justice communities, there's often this narrative of like, oh, masking is terrible. You know, masking keeps us away from each other. In person's better. And obviously that's bullshit. And I just think about how masking actually, and being specifically in this kind of community, has opened up my ability to break out of an isolation I was in that got me to a really, really bad place. And it opens up community, love, intimacy, relationship. I get to hang out. I get to have friends over on the porch. I get to go to the park. You know, I get to go to the farmer's market and walk around. I get to be in public space, which is something that disabled people have always been fighting a battle to access public space and not to be locked away or pushed into institutions behind closed doors, being told, oh, you don't get to be in the world. And there are specific ways that the masking backlash has pushed us out of public space or tried to. So I think a lot about myself as compared to friends who live in other cities where there's much less masking. And one thing I want to lift up is that Philadelphia, where I live, is a Black poor city. So I live in a neighborhood where there's a lot of Black and brown elders who never stop masking on the street. And I think that's because we all know that disasters are real and we have to take care of each other. And there's a really beautiful solidarity there. It's not like everybody does, but it's so different than being in places where no one masks. And I'm also just thinking about, as I said before, I unfortunately got COVID 2 weeks ago, and I've been testing negative for around a week when a loved one had a birthday party this past Friday and was like, hey, the new variant's surging. I'm going to ask everybody to test and wear a mask, even though we're going to be outside. And I am such a masker, but I was still like, oh, we're outside. It's probably okay, but we all masked. And it allowed us to be together and it allowed us to not worry because at least 2 people were going on trips, like a couple days after that. If they got sick, it would have ruined a very rare opportunity for them to travel. They don't travel all the time. And then what happened was the next day, I had been testing negative on rapids. And then I tested positive on a home PCR and I freaked out. And I was like, oh my God, did I just infect everybody? And then I was like, we all had masks on and we were outside. And then it was a whole thing where, after a lot of research, what I've been informed is that you can test positive on a PCR for months and not be necessarily infectious. But even, whether or not that's true, whether or not, I mean, I can't know fully, right? I'm going on a complete lack of public health care. I was like, we protected each other and we were still able to be in communion with each other and celebrate and have fun. And that's disabled love. Like, that's disabled intimacy that we did that. And that we had like a really fun social space that was all masked and outside. Yeah, I'll stop there.
This is Nicole. I think about Ellen the first time she wrote this and like how that feeling has just compounded year after year after year since she wrote this, right? Where like initially, yeah, you saw allies all the time when you went out. And now they are few and far between unless you have a really robust, wonderful circle. So I live and work in a place where I am usually the only masked person that I see in my day, encountering hundreds, if not thousands, of students and other faculty members and people in the academy. And it's exhausting, quite honestly. It's just tiring. I always tell my students in class to think about the difference between rhetoric and reality. What do we say we are capable of doing? What are we actually doing, right? This is how I get them to interrogate, what is the government? Does the government care about you? Like, let's look at what they say versus what they do, right? And I think when it comes to praxis, a lot of people who think that they are willing to make sacrifices are not actually willing to sacrifice being masked or being unmasked. And so I think it is hard when we're continually saying, like, do you know you could save someone's life? That you could ensure someone's public access, that you could ensure someone else's right to intimacy with a broader world, if you just put a scrap of cloth on your face, right? And for other people to say, no, your intimacy, your connection is not worth that to me. It's hard, I think, to face that every day. And so I feel really lucky to have lots of really robust friends online and community members online who feel the same way about their institutions. It is really hard to be teaching about education or healthcare or medicine or all of these fields that should ethically deeply care about the well-being of every person, and then to watch people not be able to enact that in their daily lives for a range of reasons, right? There are very real reasons why the federal government has failed, public health has failed to give people the tools that they need to understand why masking is important, to have the tools to do masking and testing, which is incredibly expensive if you don't have mask blocks. And so I think it's, yeah, an abject failure of our leaders to get people to understand and care, which is why grassroots community kind of organizing is the only thing that's going to save us right now.
This is Alice. Thank you for sharing, Leah and Nicole. Leah, we are friends, comrades, and fellow cat lovers. You have been a frequent guest essayist to the Disability Visibility Project as well as in this book. Your essay is on longing, and specifically ancestral longing. I personally desire so many things, and I think about my grandmothers and the women before them and how they were never able to fulfill their dreams due to patriarchal oppression and misogyny. How has the pandemic transformed your relationship with yourself and the people you care about? What do you long for now?
My answer has changed since I initially wrote my answers in the Access copy, but I'm going to read what's in the Access copy. So I long for a lot, and I've changed a lot, but I'm going to talk about the relationship between me and my mom. So as I mentioned, she died during the pandemic, and the space of the pandemic allowed a lot of very unconventional healing between us to happen. My mom was a beautiful and brilliant working class Irish, Ukrainian, Romani polio survivor. She was a survivor of violence and abuse, and for the last 5 years of her life, she was living with late-stage dementia in a care facility. She was institutionalized. And we are Central Mass, Blackstone River, Milltown femmes. She both loved and was abusive to me, and we were estranged for 25 years because it was not safe for me to be in touch with her. After I asked her to talk about the abuse and go to therapy, she threatened to have me institutionalized. I lived for many years hoping she'd come to a place where she was open to repair and connection, but that's not a choice that she made. And as I mentioned, I moved back to Massachusetts for the first time in 30 years in 2022 to be at least on the same land base as her for what I was told was her last year on the planet. And I wasn't able to physically visit her in that time, but I had a lot of conversations with her spirit on the couch, and a lot of really healing happened there. And it's really intense for me to think about how our neurodivergence, survivorhood, and disabilities are connected, overlap, and also divert. She was my first role model for loving travel and doing working class femme survivor hacks to get it, loving feral independence and being alone, connecting deeply with spirit. And she also threatened me with conservatorship and was under conservatorship when she died. So we have a really rich, deep story about the ways the medical industrial complex, class, and environmental racism overlap, because several of our disabilities, I believe, come from growing up in industrial New England, where there's a lot of toxicity in the water and the soil. And I will say that when I, in my life now, break those cycles of abuse, when I have disabled and neurodivergent community and I make a life around my disability and neurodivergence, when I get to have good love, when I get to travel and write, I'm doing it for both of us, and I am healing a lot of the pain between us because I'm fulfilling both of our disabled longings. I take, the times I travel, I take a photo of my mom with me because she couldn't really leave Worcester for a lot of her life. And I know there were so many places she wanted to go. So in doing that, I'm trying to embody what I think is a very disabled form of intergenerational love. And it may not be legible for some people as a happy mother-child relationship, but it is for me. And I would say my longing is that that healing continues, and that in the lineage that I'm creating, I get to pass on that healing, and the people who come after me in my line, who are not children of my body, because I'm not having biological children, but I have a lot of disabled family. They're going to take that and they're going to limp with it.
This is Alice. Thank you for your response, Leah. I'm so touched by what you shared about you and your mom. Nicole, we have never met or know each other personally, but I feel a kinship with you the same way I feel about Ellen and Leah. I invited you to contribute to this book after following you on social media for a time and reading a thread about the fierce love you feel for disabled people. When I read your final draft, I knew it should be the first essay in the book because I want to confront and introduce readers, especially non-disabled readers, to the notion of disabled love. And this is not solely about romantic disabled love, but something much deeper and broader. I can say that the disabled love my friends have shown me has literally saved my life. How do you show love to other disabled people, and how has disabled love transformed your life?
This is Nicole. Thank you for that question, Alice. I am, first of all, so honored to be invited to contribute to this book. I think it was a big opportunity for me to just think about intimacy in my life and really try to unpack what it meant for me in writing this piece. And I'm so glad that we connected over I'm so glad for Twitter. It's a cesspool, a hellish cesspool these days, but I'm so glad for the disabled community members that I found there. Because I have lived in all across the country in places that were not kind of hotbeds of disability activism. And so I felt really disconnected as a teenager and then in my early 20s. And now I feel very connected. And so I mentioned earlier in our discussion tonight that I have Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. And I, through the past couple decades, have had multiple life-threatening kind of bouts of symptoms of new comorbidities kind of popping up. And so just after the end of my undergrad, I was graduating, but also prepping for brain surgery because my brainstem was getting cut off. And then during grad school, I started to go into anaphylaxis, and no one could figure out why, except for other disabled people. And so absolutely, disabled people have saved my life so many times in so many different ways, really big and really small. There were so many people who reached out who I wasn't connected with at all, over Twitter or Facebook or these other kind of repositories of disabled knowledge, who shared, hey, this is the test you need to get, or hey, these are some meds you can take, or this is the kind of herbal remedy for this that the doctor's never going to tell you about because they think that is quack medicine, right? And it's bullshit. And so disabled people have continually saved my life, whether that means getting the care I need from doctors or filling in the gaps in care that I have. So one woman in like a Facebook advocacy group, which not promoting Facebook to anyone, but it is really useful for this. She became a nutritionist because she knew that people with EDS and gastroparesis were starving to death and doctors weren't filling that gap in. And so she was like, here, I will provide your care for you. And she introduced me to a formula that I drank for months before I could get a doctor to do the tests I needed to get me the treatment that I needed to be able to eat food again. And so there have been so many moments where disabled people as a whole community really showed up, even though they owed me nothing, right? Like we had no parasocial relationship. Other people just realized that I was suffering and they were like, that's unacceptable, right? And so they stepped in. And so I have so many text messages and signal threads and Twitter comments, usually from complete strangers who I have never met and will never meet, who have given me life-saving care advice. And I think my day-to-day is also just full of disabled love, which I feel so thankful to receive. And so I'm sheltering in place as much as possible. I go to work and I go to my local park for walks. And that is the kind of extent of my world right now. And I think some people might find that really limiting. I am thankful that I have the ability to kind of protect myself and other high-risk people by limiting the things that I'm doing. And I still feel really, really involved and engaged and loved, beloved, because I have really robust virtual communities. And so I am, yeah, as I mentioned, one of the few people who's still masking in my local community. That makes it hard to practice love with people who are like immediately showing that they don't love you. And so I am trying to extend love to people virtually through kind of advocacy groups, through community organizing, trying to find people who are like-minded, who are thinking through, how do we do this? How do we safely build this? What are we building? Why are we building it? And I think just like coming out and being very explicit about disability as a litmus test, the pandemic is also a really big litmus test, right? For like, who is going to stick it out? Who is going to kind of brave it out with you? And I am really lucky that I have people who are constantly texting and calling and setting up movie nights or sharing their books, sending postcards, calling about the banal everyday kind of issues at work, and kind of filling the void of isolation for me. And so I feel really lucky to have their love and to get to extend love to them as well.
This is Alice. Thank you for your response, Nicole. I feel like we have so many experiences with the medical industrial complex, and maybe that should be another anthology. Okay, now I'd like to turn the tables. I'd like Leah and Nicole to ask any questions you have for me. I will try my best to answer them, haha. Let's start with you, Leah, and then Nicole, and then I will read the question Ellen asked me.
Okay, I don't know what happened, but I'm back. My question is, how did your conception of what this book would be about and what disabled intimacies are change as you receive submissions from the folks who were in it? And I say this knowing that a lot of people's pieces, including mine, changed drastically from when you first approached them to when they were final edited.
This is Alice. Thank you, Leah. My first anthology, Disability Visibility, was a collection of stories from the 21st century that were all powerful, political, and personal. When I first envisioned my latest anthology a few years ago, I wanted it to focus on a particular theme. I decided that one purpose of disability intimacy is to push, expand, and subvert the meaning of intimacy from disabled perspectives. Most books and other forms of media often only cover intimacy as romantic love and sex. Disability intimacy is a deep dive into a specific theme that excited me because I don't think there's anything out there quite like it, and I wanted to learn and grow my understanding of intimacy by editing these amazing stories. Currently, society views disabled people as broken with lives of pity, dysfunction, and pain. When it comes to intimacy, our society has very narrow, rigid ideas of it, usually limited to sex and romance based on white heterosexual norms. I have a feeling some non-disabled people might be uncomfortable or even disgusted by the idea of disability intimacy. Our culture can't wrap their heads around disabled pleasure, creativity, and sensuality. While this book is first and foremost for disabled people, it's going to blow the minds of non-disabled readers. And that's the power of our stories. When I started working on this book, I Googled disability intimacy and the search results were disappointing and pathetic. Under the People Also Ask section, questions such as "Can people with disabilities find love?" are what I considered basic as fuck. Articles on stereotypes, stigmas, sexuality, asexuality, sexual abuse, and sexual dysfunction abounded. Stories about and by disabled people on what it's like to date, have sex, or be in a relationship abounded. There's a preponderance of stories and coverage by the media about disability that dwell on stigma, discrimination, and barriers. When there are positive stories, they are often inspirational, teachable moments to non-disabled audiences. These narrow portrayals perpetuate stereotypes and tropes, reducing disabled people into simplistic caricatures. As the editor of this anthology, it's important for me to show the diversity, complexity, depth, and nuance of the disabled experience. Disabled wisdom comes from being in community with one another. We have a culture, whether people believe it or not, and this book is imbued with our joy, care, and love. Intimacy is more than sex or romantic love. Intimacy is an ever-expanding universe composed of a myriad of heavenly bodies. Intimacy is about relationships within a person's self, with others, with communities, with nature, and beyond. I didn't have a specific idea of what disability intimacies are or what they should look like, but I know there we hold multitudes. I had a list of different topics that I had in mind and some potential contributors who might be willing to write on something close to those topics, but I wasn't wedded to it. I'm a lurker on social media and follow lots of disabled writers. As I did my research on potential contributors I read their work and got a sense of their voice and interests by following them on social media if they are on it. When I sorted out the first set of contributors I really wanted in the book, I emailed them and invited them to write an essay on the theme of intimacy and also suggested a potential topic that aligns with their work and personal interests. Throughout this process, I was mindful to stay open and be surprised by their first drafts, and that's the risk and reward of being an editor. I had faith in each contributor that said yes to being part of the book because I know they are excellent human beings with something to say, and it's actually healthy to be surprised and keep learning, because I certainly do not claim to be an expert on this subject. Instead, I am exploring and diving into uncharted waters with the contributors. They guide me as much as I guide them, and through the editing process, the questions and conversations we have about their drafts, magic happens and something different comes out in the final draft, such as with your essay, Leah. I think as writers keep working on their essays, their thought process evolves and the essay changes, which is to be expected. It would be weird if the book looked exactly like my initial book proposal. The creative process means ideas will change, things will move in another direction, going in a circular or linear path, or something completely off the grid. It can be a bit scary as an editor because I'm looking at the shape of the book overall, not wanting too many pieces on the same topic. I want to make sure there is enough variation in style, perspective, and topic, and as things progress I may approach another potential contributor if it seems like something is missing. My main priority is to make the writer's words sing, to give the writer a sense of security and trust in me, to help guide the writer's process instead of pushing them to adhere to an initial outline, and to have the writer feel good about their final draft. The relationship between a writer and editor can be fraught, but I have a reason for my edits and comments, and hopefully they will be received with an open mind. It didn't happen with all the contributors, but even if our interactions were somewhat rocky, I always reiterate that this is their work, and in the end they have the final say on edits. Before we get to Nicole's question, I'd like to ask you, Leah, based on my answer, your thoughts on our relationship as editor and writer. I edited a few other pieces by you for the Disability Visibility Project, and am curious if you notice a difference in being edited by a disabled editor versus a non-disabled editor. Thank you for your question, Leah. Nicole, do you have a question?
Sorry, are you going to ask Nicole a question, or do you want me to answer the you want me to answer the question you just posed? Got it. Alice, I'm not just saying this to gas you up, but it's really real. You're one of the best editors I've ever had. You bring out the best work in me. No, it's true. You can shake your head all you want. It's still true. This may sound bratty to some people. I don't love working with non-disabled editors mostly because it's a real pain in the ass. It's gotten a little bit better, and I have the privilege and interesting situation of having a lot of books that I've written or co-edited, but I still have to fight new editors all the time. They, for a lot of reasons. I mean, I speak in a colloquial working class non-white language, and copy editors always think it's a mistake, even though I'm like, I've got 10 fucking books and they've won awards. I write this way on purpose. But with the Crip shit, there's a fundamental lack of understanding with abled editors that there are disabled languages and slang and shorthand and flavor, and I don't want that edited out. There are still abled editors who, I'm really not trying to write the 101 anymore, and they will jump in and be like, do you want to explain more about your disability? And I'm like, that's not what this is about. I had one editor identify as MAD, capital M. I was writing this piece about transformative justice and disability, and I used either the word mad or the word crazy with a capital C, and the whole piece is about radical mad people's movements and abuse. And he wrote in and he's like, people with mental health limitations would be so hurt by you using this language. And I was like, stop. And it's a waste of time and energy. And when you have disabilities where you have limits on your time and energy, I am so angry at having to spend so much time often fighting with 3 separate copy editors to be like, no, we're going back to the original way it was. No. And to be like, I'm not trying to be a diva, but I won't have you edit the disability out of my piece. And with you, Alice, we can just skip all that nonsense, and you can draw the much deeper, richer, like, it's not a 101, it's like a 505 disabled writing out of me. So I appreciate the ways in which that you midwife all of these pieces in Disability Visibility Project and all of your curatorial work. And you are such a godsend for disabled culture in that way. Yeah.
Thank you for your response, Leah. Nicole, do you have a question for me or something to share?
This is Nicole. Yes, I absolutely have a question. So I am totally in awe of your ability to bring people together. You're shaking your head already, but this is literally what you've done for years and years and years for our community. And so you've brought people together through the Disability Visibility Project and these edited collections and all of your local advocacy. And there's so much beauty to me in these repositories, archives of disabled knowledge. Do you have advice for those who are kind of coming into their disability consciousness, who are trying to find that kind of community, but haven't worked out how to do so yet? Thank you.
This is Alice. Thank you for this question, Nicole. You are too kind. I find so much joy in creating spaces for us. When I founded the Disability Visibility Project 10 years ago, I encouraged people to record their oral histories at StoryCorps, a nonprofit that has a relationship with the Library of Congress. It was an attempt to record our history, our culture, in our own words, which, as you know, is so rare. We live in such an obliged eugenic society that seeks to eliminate us. And history is told by the victors, or I presume largely non-disabled white perspectives. We ended up having over 100 oral histories archived at the Library of Congress, which makes me feel really good, knowing they leave disabled wisdom behind and are accessible to the public and scholars. My impulse to create spaces for disabled stories comes from a love of them and a love of community. It's also from a place of anger and resistance. We have always been here, but we just need more infrastructure and mechanisms to not only tell our stories, but get our stories out there. What we have right now when it comes to representation of disabled people in pop culture, media, everything is slowly getting better, but it's not really enough for what we deserve and need. I would have to say all of my work is political. It's more than just political, of course, but it's political in that it isn't diabolist, a small poke against the giant diabolist, racist, capitalist grizzly bear. I'm talking about society actually, but I like to imagine structural oppression as a ferocious bear or kraken. When I first started, I created a website and got a Twitter account and a few other platforms. It felt very lonely out there, and I didn't know if my story mattered or if I was even a real writer. I messed around and slowly figured out what I care about and how controlling my own narrative was a political act when there are still so many disabled stories in mainstream media told through non-disabled lenses. It didn't matter to me that my blog posts didn't reach many people at first. It still had value just by existing. And as I dipped my toes into Twitter, it took me a long time, but I started to find other disabled people, and it continues to be one of the main ways I hear about disabled writers from all over the world, and that's how I learned about you, Nicole. In the past, it was a robust place where so many marginalized communities built culture and power. It's not as fun now, but this is still a space that has value for money. On Twitter, I developed a sharp, concise, and hopefully interesting voice, and it was a platform where I could share the work of other people and co-partner with various disabled people on various campaigns and projects. As I slowly became more well-known on Twitter and just locally, I got the opportunities to write in major publications and the chance to submit a book proposal for my first anthology, Disability Visibility. With each of these opportunities, I knew what an immense privilege it was to be in that position, and I tried my best to advance disability culture and the lived experience of disability, which I believe is political. In editing this book and my first anthology, all of my decisions regarding the theme and the contributors were political. The selection of the issues and contributors were all deliberate and intentional. The introduction of disability intimacy is my chance to challenge readers and have them think about ableism in a larger context in which these stories exist. Stories, such as the many wonderful ones in this book, are powerful with the potential to change someone's heart and outlook on the world, and this is my humble attempt to help widen a universe for all of us. And this is just one universe among many created by disabled people everywhere. It never ends, Nicole. There is no end to the number of our stories and how they will proliferate everywhere. It brings me such joy creating space for us and seeing so many disabled writers doing amazing things. To get back to your question, there are lots of people out there who might be hesitant to identify as disabled, or chronically ill, or neurodivergent, or any disability-related identity. It can be really difficult finding your people or figuring out how to start, as I shared my own experience finding community online. This reminds me of the growing long COVID community that's going to radically change the disability community, making it larger and even more diverse. Isolation, shame, internalized ableism, and stigma still exists for many of us, especially people who are new to the disability community. And there will be people who are disabled but will never identify, even though I still consider them part of the community, because we shouldn't gatekeep who is disabled enough to be in our spaces. My advice for these folks is first, welcome to this nebulous, ever-evolving disability community. We are not a monolith, and you don't have to say the right words or look the part in order to be with us. Only recently I have been identifying as someone with chronic pain because I didn't think I could claim it. Isn't that funny? It took me a long time to understand that what I have been living with isn't normal and that some of my suffering can be alleviated. That's one example of how my growing identities are related to the communities I'm a part of or want to be a part of. There shouldn't be an expectation to feel pride or enforced performative joy when the lived experience can be difficult and messy. There's space for everyone, especially newbies, to make mistakes, and all of us should have the grace for people to learn and grow. I guess I would also say there's no rush or pressure to find your people. You can start small, reading some books about the lived experience of disability. There are a lot of memoirs and books like this one in my first anthology, Disability Visibility, to get started. Some readers reached out and told me they realized they were disabled by reading Disability Visibility, which just shows how powerful our stories are. If you don't mind dipping your toes in the cesspool that is social media, I would suggest trying it and following disabled people and searching for specific terms you might be interested in. Locally, there are disabled people everywhere that might not be apparent to you. And this is also another reason why identity matters. It's not everything, but it does matter, because by being visible, some folks will feel less alone, even though there are risks to visibility. Another bit of advice is for people to start some political education and learn about disability justice, a framework that grounds all of my work and my own personal beliefs and politics. It helped me understand everyone can do something, that everyone is whole and perfect as they are, and that we are all interdependent with each other. We can make a difference when we can find each other and be in solidarity with others. Society is structured and designed to reinforce multiple axes of oppression, which includes sexism, racism, ageism, and ableism. We live in a society that upholds hypercapitalism and white supremacy, where ableism is baked into every aspect of life. Ableism centers normative body minds, which, in turn, marginalizes us to the edges. And it uses a scarcity model to pit groups against each other, which is one huge lie. Scarcity is a political choice. We could live in a society with free healthcare, education, and housing where everyone is valued whether they work or are quote-unquote productive. I do believe once people have an understanding of how ableism, like white supremacy, undergirds everything in our lives, once we see the matrix, that is, they have a responsibility to undo their ableist thinking and practices. And they have a responsibility to burn it fucking down. Each person has the capacity to learn, be curious, reflect, and do the work in figuring out what they can do to push back at these oppressive forces that seem so overwhelming. And this is something that can be done in tandem with other people. Collectively, little and big acts of anti-ableism contribute to a larger movement building a world centered on disability justice and freedom, where people are truly embraced as they are. This is the dream. That is, it's my dream and I think the dream of many others. I rambled quite a bit, Nicole, and have no idea if I answered your question, but I hope it helped, ha ha ha. Since I need questions in advance from our panelists so I can type my responses ahead of time, Ellen asked me this question. She wrote, quote, Alice, why did you decide to go from disability visibility to disability intimacy for your second collection? What drew you to intimacy as a theme? Do you envision a third disability-centered collection, and what would that theme be? End quote. And this is my response to Ellen's question. Part of the answer to this question I answered earlier with Leah's question, I think. When I turned 50 this year, and I've been reflecting a lot about the past. Because of increasing weakness with swallowing and breathing, I had a serious hospitalization 2 years ago, resulting in a tracheostomy at my neck that's connected to a ventilator that I am dependent on 24/7 and a feeding tube for nutrition and hydration. I can no longer speak and started using a text-to-speech app that you are hearing now. I had to heal and adjust to a radically new cyborg body with complex medical needs that no longer felt mine. I had to navigate unpleasant physical experiences that resulted in a number of trips to the emergency department. This past January, I had a brief stay in the ICU that was horrific because my pain was not controlled and they would not allow me to bring my phone so that I could communicate during a medical procedure, which left me feeling powerless while I was in extreme pain. I continue to process trauma, loss, and feelings of shame and disgust about my body despite the innate confidence and healthy ego I possess in spades. These contradictions and tensions can hold true simultaneously. My memories of what happened 2 years ago have been very hazy, time folding like a piece of origami into an abstract alien shape. I remember I wanted to edit another anthology after my memoir, Year of the Tiger, because I wanted to switch things up and do something different. Intimacy, as a concept, was something I wanted to explore and share with the world because I was irate and tired of the ALICE tropes and stereotypes about disabled people who have sex. There is so much disabled wisdom and creativity that completely expands and blows up conventional understandings of intimacy. When I became seriously sick that summer, almost dying multiple times, I experienced such gentle waves of community care and love. I was at a very low point and needed so much help. My friendships became more intimate, and that deepened my understanding of intimacy. As I was trying to recover, while having to deal with all kinds of new health-related problems, frustrations, and disappointments, I worked on the book, which was a revelation. Editing an anthology is like wrangling a bunch of magnificent cats. It's so different from writing a book on your own. With intimacy as the theme of this book, the contributors put such tender care into their work. I delicately edited these essays with sensitivity, knowing how many people put their trust in me. And I was so delighted you gave permission to reprint your poem for this book. I believe the relationships I built with the contributors during the editing process facilitated some magic that helped their pieces blossom. Working on this book was such a joy and a part of my healing process. Being creative, collaborating with others, and building something beautiful together gives me life. It was a lifeline in the midst of pain and suffering. Overall, it's brought me a sense of gratitude that I'm still alive and have the privilege to work with so many talented people. Initially, in the making of this book, I looked at intimacy intellectually as something to understand and learn from, but disabled life fucked shit up, and I experienced disabled intimacies in a raw, visceral, and truthful way. It's pretty wild and somewhat fitting that the convergence of these events led me to a deeper appreciation of disabled love, care, and intimacy. To your second question, I always envisioned a trilogy of anthologies, and I can share with you all publicly for the first time that I signed the contract for my third and final anthology that is going to examine another important aspect of the disabled experience. The press release hasn't come out yet, so I will have to keep it a secret for now, but I will say it will be about a concept that is complicated and fraught, which will be extremely exciting and challenging to work on. Folks can follow my website for the latest about my upcoming book or sign up for my newsletter at disability-visibility-newsletter.ghost.io. Thank you, Nicole and Leah, for being here online with me in conversation, which I believe is a form of intimacy across time and space with the audience. I've said this in my previous events, but I believe all of us are now sharing a very special disabled space where we can just be together. Thank you for contributing to my anthology and for your tender stories. On that note, I will kick it back to Elliot for a few last words.
Thank you so much. Thank you all so much again for tuning in tonight. And thank you to Alice and all of our panelists and interpreters and captioner for taking the time to join us. Again, Disability Intimacy is available to order on the Harvard Bookstore website, and we hope you all have a lovely evening. Thank you so much. Good night, everyone.